How to influence people and become a master of persuasion. Discover advanced methods to analyze people, control emotions and body language, leverage manipulation in business and relationships. Written by John Clark, narrated by Andrea Nelson and Byron Armstrong.
Congratulations on purchasing How to Influence People, Guide to Master the Psychology of Persuasion, and thank you for doing so. The following chapters will discuss about the power of persuasion. Learn how to control your emotions, read body language to analyze people, and many more manipulation tactics you will be able to use in business, relationships, and with friends. The information found in this book will best explore the techniques you need to learn so you will be able to master the psychology of persuasion. Thanks again for choosing this audiobook. Every effort was made to ensure it is full of as much useful information as possible. Please enjoy. Introduction. There is a belief amongst most people that when sequences and situations are created to change the perception and reactions of a person, it is a negative thing. But if we were to look closely, we would observe that this is something that manifests on a daily basis in our lives. We are constantly trying to change how people see us and the things we do. Sometimes we want them to view us in a positive way, and other times in a negative way, depending on what we want to achieve at that moment in time. Some people call this manipulation, and it is indeed so. But manipulation is not necessarily evil, as most people would lead you to believe. Many believe it to be associated with only exploitation and deception for personal gain, but fail to praise such tactics when they are used positively in eliminating unhealthy habits and behaviors. To put this in perspective, do you remember the days when your parents had to promise you gifts and extra playtime just to get you to complete your homework? That is manipulation in its simplest form, but it doesn't match up with what people like to believe of manipulation. They clearly were not manipulating you for reasoning for their own benefit. If anything, it was for yours. People turn to manipulation for a variety of reasons: to advance their own purposes and agendas, to help you attain your own goals and objectives, to gain power, or are already causing until they are too far gone in the game. Some people keep manipulating everyone every time without the slightest hint of guilt. Such people are psychopaths. This audiobook has not been produced to turn anyone into a psychopath, nor is it written to challenge the status quo of manipulation in the world. It is written to show you the ropes at a skill many already utilize. Yes, everyday people manipulate others in their business environments, in social settings, in friendships and relationships. So it is high time you sat down and learned the tricks to an art that all influential people possess. Chapter 1: Manipulation as a Tool of Masters. In the world nowadays, a variety of situations necessitates or determines ascribing someone the title of master. But in all of those situations, the master is the one who has most influence on the people around him or her. The power such a master possesses could have initially been attained by skill or reputation, but to avoid losing it over time, the master has to be adept at retaining his or her influence. Such a person is usually held in high regard, regardless of status or wealth, and very rarely do these people attain such a status by being themselves or by being ordinary. Being so might make people to like and admire you, but the true respect and power over others must be gotten by other means. This is where manipulation comes in. Manipulation goes hand in hand with power. Wherever you can sense the effect of manipulation, there is bound to be an imbalance of power. The power in such societies is usually concentrated in the hands of a few who could be referred to as masters over others. These people are well versed at making people think along the same lines as them, making people act along the same lines as them, making people follow them unconditionally, and generally being able to influence the thoughts and opinions of those around them effectively. If you were to look back in history at some of the most influential people, one of the things you would observe is that the ideas they advocated were not necessarily moral or even right at all. Their beliefs were not necessarily righteous or ethical, but whenever they needed it, people and followers flocked to their sides, ready to follow them to the end and ready to defend the ideas they had been taught to believe and defend. From terrorist leaders to controversial politicians and men of power, who, regardless of the revulsion their ideas seemed to generate, still seemed to be gaining more power. Why was this so? Because they knew how to influence and control people. It didn't matter what they said, but provided they could make people think how they wanted them to and act how they wanted them to, they were never at risk of being powerless. Their power didn't originate from a sense of righteousness or correctness, but from the sense of followership they were able to instill in people. It is this sense of followership and loyalty that you should aim high to achieve through manipulation. Manipulation is not just your key to power, it is your key to success, because with power comes the ability to thrive off people in any environment. This ability is inherent in all successful people. Whether you are an entrepreneur or someone with a daily job, as long as people are involved, the knowledge of people and how to influence them is necessary for your success. Some people have those once in a lifetime ideas or a revolutionary approach to solving a problem, but without the knowledge of how to thrive on the backs of others, they would never be able to fully consolidate on what they have. The ability to manipulate people is yours to use as you wish. You could use it in your search for personal happiness or in your quest for wealth and affluence, whichever one is your choice. This book, however, has only one aim: helping you become a master in whatever you choose to be or do. The Secrets of the Greatest Men. Manipulation and deception are one of the numerous skills possessed by the greatest and most powerful men to have roamed this earth. Not all men are Gandhi, and if the history books were properly scoured and its annals scrutinized, many of the men who have exerted the most influence on the world would be shown to be manipulators, who merely hid their more negatively perceived talents in a shroud of piety, idealism, and oratory. This is not to say that these men were evil or bad. They just understood the need to do what was necessary when necessary, and if this involved tweaking the emotions and thoughts of people to generate reactions that were favorable to their causes, so be it. And so, the truth behind many of the world's greatest men and leaders is not divine intervention or an alignment of the stars, but rather a lack of the emotional restrictions that plague the ordinary men. Many of these men, from Caesar to Napoleon, weren't evil or psychopathic, but had a goal and a vision of the world that couldn't be achieved by simply following the rules and hoping that other persons saw things the same way they did. No, great men do not wait, they act. Not to limit this to only men, we have had some pretty powerful women in the past who understood that to wield real power was not a matter of honesty or being a good wife, but rather how to get people to do what you want when you want it. That is the essence of manipulation. To get people so dependent and so in awe of you that you could easily influence their principles and guide their actions in the direction you believe it ought to be going in. Take, for instance, the sexual manipulation of both Caesar and Mark Antony by Cleopatra in a bid to protect her interests and titles. It is mostly overlooked, but that has in no way detracted from her brilliant manipulation of two very powerful men. What I am trying to say here is that many of the events that have shaped the world politically, industrially, even religiously are so mired in manipulation. It's hard to dismiss its usefulness in both the old days and the modern world. It is used as a business tactic, as a means of motivation, or as an aid to persuasion in almost any facet of life. In the modern world, manipulation is synonymous with politics and is widely thought to be used only by politicians, business executives, and the like. But if you look closely, you would see that we all practice a form of manipulation. In fact, any setting in which there seems to be an imbalance of power probably contains an element of manipulation. And since this imbalance in power is a staple of the realistic world, it could be said that manipulation is rife in the world and in our everyday life. There is manipulation in our daily interactions, in our personal relationships, our business relationships, and even religious interactions. Consider the clergy, who spends a large chunk of his sermon emphasizing on punishment of sin and the travails of hell. He might be speaking the truth, but his words are meant to impart fear in you, and it is that fear which he counts on to make the difference in your approach to life. That is a classic case of emotional manipulation using fear. The cleric does not mean to do this, but deep down he realizes that this is the most effective way of knocking into people the need for his or her God. He does not mean to manipulate you, but he does it nonetheless. That is what manipulation is. You might truly respect the autonomy of a person when you feel you need to influence them. You could unknowingly find yourself trying to take advantage of their emotions, and this means you are manipulating them. You do not have to be evil. You simply need to recognize the necessity for a line of action and possess the strength of mind to do what needs to be done. Over the course of this audiobook, you would learn how to wield similar power over people, how to make yourself indispensable, and how to make yourself capable of greatness. The often overlooked human need to be manipulated. As humans, we have all been blessed with autonomy, the right to make our own decisions and live by them, and any threat to such autonomy generally has us on guard. That is the reason why, when faced with anything, law or person, we believe aims to rip this independence from us, we fight back with or without violence. Take into consideration the numerous uprisings in history as proof of this. The people who led the French and English revolutions did not possess more power than the monarchs in power. But when they felt their needs being thrown out the door and their independence being preyed upon, they fought back, and they fought hard. Our history when it comes to defending our independence is quite rich, from the early advocates of our modern religious facing up to the idol worshippers in their day, to the women throughout history who have fought for equal rights. They might have not realized what they were doing, but they were exercising an innate human need to be free. But just as the need to be free exists, so does the need to be controlled, or the need for order. This need to be controlled is the reason why humans needed monarchs and governments to rule and govern their daily life. Because if left to live life freely and unchecked, we would have been consumed by chaos. But as our population grew and we expanded to cover more territory, so did the influence of such monarchs and governments. The controlling forces on our life wear thin, even becoming insignificant. Though this is on a much grander scale and might, It is a larger manifestation of our need to sometimes be guided by others. Thus, it is apt to say that every one of us needs guidance. The guidance might be spiritual, academic, or psychological. But if we were to trace the source of our knowledge, we would find that it must have originated from a person or book, and very rarely is it completely original. To better understand this, consider how you always feel the need to try and impart the knowledge you have unto others, either by holding lectures or by giving advice. This need to guide one another is how we humans have passed on our knowledge over millenniums. It is because of this inherent need for guidance, knowledge, and control that we are susceptible to manipulation. I'm not saying that anybody deserves to be manipulated, but that everybody can be manipulated. And since whatever is possible is always done, the possibility of being manipulated means that some of us, or rather many of us, are bound to fall victim to people whose goal is to manipulate us. It is the way of the world. The only difference between you and the next person is how good you are at it and how you want to use your influence and skill. Manipulation is not evil. It's just a tool. It is widely believed that manipulation is evil. I neither support nor assert to this belief. Manipulation is the use of any sort of influence, be it physical, emotional, or financial, over a person, group, or situation to generate a desired outcome. The outcome is most likely one which favors you and your goals, but does not necessarily need to be detrimental to the other people involved. On another note, the belief of manipulation being negative usually assumes that this goal you want to achieve is not in sync with that of your mark or target. But what if it does? Won't it then be more apt to classify your manipulation as a means of motivation, or at the very least, as a positive influence? Consider this. You have a boss who is hell-bent on following a particular line of action as regards a new business deal. Yet, facts and your gut tell you that his approach or decision is a wrong one. But he refuses to listen to the opinions of anyone, probably because his stance is a result of a very old sentiment or bias. In this case, every straightforward and honest approach has failed. Wouldn't it be better to manipulate and tweak his emotions just a little bit and save his job and the company's balance sheet from recording a loss? In such a case, your manipulation of your boss is still considered immoral, but on the general balance of events, it is the right course of action if all means of rational persuasion have been exhausted. From a conventional point of view, the idea of one person manipulating another is considered a criticism of the manipulator's behavior. But is manipulation always immoral? The above example doesn't seem immoral. When looked at on a grander scale, we would most likely agree that manipulation is rife in our everyday life. But the only times it is actually classified as evil or bad is when it leads to harm, be it emotional or psychology, of the target. Sure, manipulation can expose vulnerabilities that otherwise might have remained hidden. Yes, manipulation could lead to oppression of people, but it could also be the only way to achieve a truly noble goal. Consider this next example. Assuming you are a security officer who was unlucky enough to be on duty on the day a terrorist was captured, and you have credible intel that the terrorist is slated to carry out an attack on that very day, or maybe during the week. You have tried every possible method of rational reasoning, from trying to tap into his or her empathy to offering deals, but the terrorist has refused to budge, and the only way to extract the information without resorting to violence is to employ manipulation as a tool. Is this considered immoral? Or is the immorality simply justified simply because you get to save many lives? Depending on your answer to the above question, the knowledge shared in this book might one day be beneficial to you. If you possess a hardline view on the perception of manipulation and are of the opinion that it can never be used for a positive goal, the knowledge of this book is of no practical use to you, and you're better served stopping here and picking a book that is more acceptable and is less likely to offend your sensibilities. Chapter 2: Mastering Your Emotions and Reactions. Manipulation is a game of emotions, knowing how to read them, how to tweak them, how to play them, erase them, create them, and react to them. Every manipulative move should be aimed at exposing the emotional core of your mark or target, because that is the only way of owning their actions and decisions. But for you to adequately and efficiently affect your desired change in the individual or group of relevance, you have to have an understanding of yourself and your emotions. To put it cleanly, you have to know yourself more than any other person, because only then can you make a move at controlling others. Know yourself. This is key. Knowing yourself is key, if not the most important ingredient to possess before you embark on the road to mastering people. This is because to avoid overreaching or underestimating yourself, you have to possess an understanding of your abilities, a keen sense as to where your strengths end and where your weaknesses begin. Only with this knowledge can you decipher the direction in which you should be leading your mark and the approach you should be taking to do so. Such in-depth knowledge of oneself would require a level of truthfulness in accepting one's limitations and a further level of self-discipline to avoid crossing those limits. The idea behind getting under your target's defenses would vary depending on the target, but would require you to either play up your weaknesses while emphasizing your strengths, or play up your strengths while emphasizing your weaknesses. Both require you to be alert. As important as understanding your limits, it would be nothing without an understanding of your emotions, and that would be incomplete without the ability to recognize your emotional markers. These markers are what people see regardless of what goes on in your head, and thus are more likely to influence their thoughts. This knowledge is not achieved by simply making a resolution, but by logically analyzing your every move in a bid to pinpoint how your internal emotions manifest as external actions. This might seem complex, but it is actually quite easy. It just involves thinking about your reactions and emotion as two separate entities, then following them through step by step to the end and figuring out how one influences the other. Let me give you a hypothetical situation. A friend of yours who is usually quiet and reserved walks up to you one day and she shoves you in the back in a moment of excitement. It was a playful shove, but you, not realizing it for this particular friend, turns back and are about to express your anger before you notice him and check yourself. He sees this and wonders why you would react in such a way, and in a playful manner shoves you again. This time, however, you don't check yourself, but instead launch into a tirade. At the time he hit you the first time, let's assume you were in a rather normal state, not particularly angry or happy. After the first hit, you got angry, but controlled yourself. While this control is necessary to possess for the skill you're learning, the important part of your analysis should be what gave your anger away, since you had not actually reacted. You have to know if it was a clenched fist by your side, a hardened facial expression, a twitching eye, or whatever, because controlling the reaction is only half the lesson. You have to behave outwardly like the thought of a reaction never even crossed your mind. This is the kind of logical breakdown you must grow adept at performing on yourself and your actions. You must abandon the ordinary man's habits of reacting impulsively and start reacting logically. Next, you have to consider your loss of control on the succeeding incident. Such a reaction could point to the shove itself being an act that ticks you off, an underlying problem or problems with the aforementioned friend, or even your limit in such situations. Whichever one it is, you need to get a handle on it and eliminate all emotions from your reactions, unless when you feel it has to be released. Be the master of your emotions. Other than your strengths and weaknesses, another key area of your life and being to pay attention to is your emotions. Most people underestimate the need for a control over their emotions, and that is the major reason they have little control over the emotions of others. I am not advising for you to remain meek regardless of the provocation, or for you to flare up at the slightest sign of resistance. No, what I am saying is that you have to be able to control whatever reaction is necessary in the moment, to bring it out at a moment's notice, and to lock it back up when it has served its purpose. You need to recognize your emotional triggers and work at dulling their effect. Failing at such an important facet of your person could lead you to unwillingly push a target too far, or to allow a target to run wild and free for too long. Meanwhile, mastering the control of your emotion in this way would give the double advantage of reducing the ability people possess to rile you up or manipulate you, while also granting you complete autonomy over your own reactions. As I implied earlier, different targets require different approaches and different treatments, and for this reason, different emotions would elicit different effects on them. Where anger might cause one to be subservient, it might cause another to be more belligerent. This is the major reason you have to master not just the ability to act and create emotional reactions, but also the ability to suppress your more natural emotional reactions, as these said reactions can interfere with the image you are trying to portray. Your control on your emotions is one of the major tools by which you control the perception people have of you. And when it comes to manipulating people, it is key that you control their perception of you, because only then would you control how they will treat you. It is important for you to remember that the initial way by which people judge another's character is through his or her behavior and emotional disposition, and as such, control over both would grant unto you the power to control people's perception of you. From another angle, your emotional disposition towards issues and events is usually a cornerstone of your reputation, at least in the minds of most people. This is a weakness in people. They assume that emotions are almost unchangeable, thereby nullifying the possibility in their minds that one is capable of manipulating his or her emotions to deceive them. They believe that your reaction to a situation would always stay consistent unless another effect is in play. The trick is introducing another reaction or emotion that contradicts your normal in a bid to gain their attention, while lowering their defenses to deal with your perceived soft spot. Because of this nullification, this is a belief you must always be out to take advantage of. The warning behind this is that before attempting to cash in on this mistake, you have to have fine-tuned your ability to act out scenarios and create emotions. If you are not well versed at this, a smart target might figure out your play before you're even started. Furthermore, when utilizing this weakness, the emotion being introduced should be as evanescent as possible, so as not to confuse the target. What I mean is that with such a tactic, the effect you're going for is the, "Oh, that is so unlike him" effect, and not the "oh, he has changed so much from the time we met" effect. This means that the emotion to be introduced should be temporary and fleeting, only surfacing for a brief period of time. Most times, the tactic is effective for a particular emotion only once or twice, and should never be attempted consecutively using the same emotion. Here is an illustration of this particular trick. The target is a female, and you have gone through the basics with her, establishing a character and manufacturing reactions for every predictable action of hers. In your bid to seduce her, you have gotten to first base, first kiss, and now you're looking to score a big finish and leave. But she's been very coy and defensive about sex, and you haven't been able to lower her defenses on the issue. One day, an issue comes up between you guys, and ordinarily, you would have let it slide with a smile. But instead, you flare up for a bit and take to keeping to yourself. She avoids bringing up the issue for a while, but later comes in for the conversation. The major point here is the change from your regular emotional reaction to a more aggressive one. This would prompt her to believe that you might have lost a little bit of emotional control, and seeing as such instability is a constant source of discussion in relationships, your current countenance would require her to have a conversation with you. Bear in mind that the conversation is not for you to petulantly complain about her for not having sex with you, but rather for you to make her feel she is in a position of power to broker peace while considering you to be the victim. You are not making things overly hard or easy for her. Your time to act would come after you have settled the quarrel. It might be right for you to initiate a makeout session rather than to ask her to have sex. This moment in which she has lowered her defenses to accommodate your emotional issues is when you make your move. And if you have played your cards right up to that moment, you are about to get that score you have been hoping for. From then onwards, it is up to you to proceed as you wish, but with smarts, of course. Do not forget, overusing this tactic increases the possibility of exposing your game to your target. Develop your instincts. Instincts are natural. They are either born from experience or you're born with them. It is that voice in your head that speaks to you when you're in a fix and need a quick solution to your problem. It is the one that guides most of your impulsive reactions. I bet you used to doubt your impulses could change, but trust me, they can. Many people believe impulses can only be controlled, but that is for someone who still wants to possess impulses. Real masters of emotions do not just control their impulses, they eliminate them. Only when those impulses are absent do the instincts you have trained yourself in start to kick in. Our instincts are a product of our deeper nature, our deeper understanding, and our environment. They usually mirror the things we have learned and experienced. When we act on our instincts, we're basically surrendering to our past experiences and innermost directions. These directions can be changed, but not easily. To truly develop your instincts is not a matter of turning pages or staring at a screen and absorbing words, but rather putting your skills to the test in real life and facing failure, because only with these can you correct the folly of past experiences and create new directions. You have to put your newly learned tactics to work, feel them out, recognize how to make them click for you, and depending on what you succeed or fail at, your mind will automatically store all of these experiences as either positive results inducing actions or negative results inducing actions. It is based on the presence of this more advanced knowledge that your instincts become sharper and more trustworthy because you stop making decisions steeped in theoretical propaganda and start making experienced decisions. Instincts are necessary in understanding people and situations, because only when you know what to look out for can you correctly react. But in instances where the mark is still more of a stranger, you have to rely on your instincts and experiences to guess what type of person you're dealing with in terms of temperament, likes, dislikes, potential tells, and the likes. Without the necessary sharp instincts, these would be quite difficult, if not impossible. Chapter 3: Knowledge of Emotional Reactions and How to Read Them. Reading people is arguably the most vital tool to a successful manipulation. This might be an art to some or a science to others, depending on if they are naturally talented at it or if it is a completely acquired skill. Don't get me wrong. I do not mean to say that some people are born with the ability to read people. What I mean is that it comes easier to some people with time than others. Reading people and their emotions is a historically difficult task, and yet without it, attempting a manipulation is akin to a blind man climbing a mountain. Many believe it to be about making snap decisions based on how people look and jumping to conclusions before you have even shared a word. But in truth, it is way more than that. Before we jump into this, I should warn you that psychologists have confirmed that there is no foolproof way to read or decipher people. And I would like to personally add that many of the methods you might learn might seem contradictory. Having said this, it is up to you to engage your wits and let your instincts guide you. A key facet of reading people is their emotional disposition towards various situations. To really understand them through this means, you need to have watched them react to a few situations so as to give you a feel as to how they might react in similar and contrasting settings. However, emotions are notoriously difficult to decipher, and many amateurs make the mistake of translating signs and gestures into singular meanings. This is wrong because a sign could denote multiple possible emotions. It is due to this possibility that signs and gestures should not be treated or read as individual entities, but rather should be taken contextually, while also putting into consideration other facts available to you. The last ingredient that is needed to make the result of a reading as close to reality as possible is a sharp instinct. I have spoken about developing this in Chapter 2 and will refrain from discussing further, but in my opinion, it is the most important tool for reading people. Knowing your mark. The first step to reading a mark or target is to abandon all of your previous projections and prejudices about people. These prejudices could be racial, ethnic, etc., but they should all be thrown out because without a clean slate on which to present your facts, you risk destroying your readings with bias and sentiments. As a manipulator, your main goal in reading people, especially strangers, is not to spot deceit, but to spot openings which could be used to forge connections or to discover character traits that could be used to your advantage. I would advise that when initially attempting manipulations, you pick targets that are more insecure, lonely, or are possessing of low self-esteem. This is usually obvious from their need to defend themselves regularly, an eagerness to join or participate in a conversation, shyness, tendency to back down from confrontations, and similar behaviors. A general way to get people to initially lower their defenses with you is to act charming. Do not act all weird and slimy with them, but adopt a natural, witty charm, the kind reserved for your principal or favorite high school teacher back in the day. This is especially effective with shy or insecure targets, people who would welcome compliments and are more likely to warm to jokes and strangers faster. Another way is to break down the trust barrier by offering a little of yourself and your secrets first. This part of you doesn't necessarily have to be true, but it must be believable. Once the primary connection is formed, however, it is time to begin information gathering. If your mark is talkative, you're in luck. Simply keep quiet and let the prattle run. There is bound to be at least a tidbit of information scattered in between. However, if the target is more reserved or quieter, a little bit of skillful prodding is needed to tap into the right vibe. And once you get it, be sure to keep the buzz going for as long as possible. Other than information garnered from conversation, you can also proceed to watch the crowd he or she hangs out with, her favorite drinks, favorite color, and hobbies. This might seem very banal, but knowledge of them could give you an in with the mark, and that's all that is needed to improve your status in their lives. Once you have established the right relationship, the next step is to hunt for more private bits of information, the ones most likely to push the buttons you need pushed. Observing and translating emotional reactions. To properly observe a person's reactions and understand the logic or motive behind them, you have to take an objective perspective of the person's actions, devoid of any connections whatsoever. To do this, you first have to establish the nature of the events or situations causing such a reaction to check for its conventionality. Because since most people tend to react conventionally to certain things, the abnormalities and oddities are the ones to look out for. Next, you analyze the markers of these reactions in the person so that if such a reaction were to occur for another stimulus, it would be clear what such a person is feeling. Some emotions may possess the same marker and would therefore require secondary markers or experience with the target to tell them apart. The need for marking the emotional reaction of the target as well as its causes is to be well placed to use the emotions to your advantage. Also, knowing the tells would expose to you the presence of a particular emotion, allowing you to adapt to the mood and needs of the person, thus keeping yourself relevant while making them believe that you care. This might probably only be necessary at the beginning of the association, as the person is more likely to show more subservience or dependence as the manipulations grow deeper. Deciphering and translating the emotions of a person might seem tricky at first, but usually gets easier with time. For instance, staying with a new cousin, family relative, or roommate might be difficult at first, but as you start to warm up to them and learn about their eccentricities, what makes them tick, and what kills their buzz, their secrets begin to up to you one at a time. It's the same way with targets of manipulations. You need to invest time in understanding and learning their reactions and what they mean so as to avoid pushing the wrong buttons at the wrong times. Learn to take a cue. Very rarely you might encounter an oddity that more or less does not conform to the reading you have arrived at on a particular person. Do not fret and do not react too swiftly. It is better to ignore it outwardly while watching for signs of repetition. The smart play would be to analyze it. Try to understand what brought about the anomaly and is it likely to happen again. This is necessary because manipulation is about control of not only the target, but of everything affecting the target that can be controlled. Those that cannot be controlled should be predicted and skillfully avoided to prevent any surprises from occurring. Take, for example, you have cultivated a manipulative relationship with a young lady or man who is quite reserved and is more prone to long periods of silence. Then, on a night out together, the target completely flips script and goes all wild partygoer on you. Do not react hastily. It could be as a result of something or someone in their life that you're not familiar with, and a hasty reaction against a previously entrenched stimulus could be rather counterproductive. Instead, it would be advisable for you to go along with the flow and later question their behavior. This would enable you to gain the knowledge you want without relinquishing control of the situation. This is the idea behind taking a clue. You have to be ready to adapt and shift your position to better understand the situation. To react or to obey. The key to always getting it right. This is one of my favorite rules because it requires patient thinking and smart decision making. The translation is rather simple. To react is to adopt an active approach, while to obey is to do otherwise. The rule applies to you, the manipulator, and the target. It is simply used to stop impulsive action. The question is quite straightforward. Do you react to a situation or let things slide? This question is one you should never fail to ask yourself before putting another ploy in motion. It would be reckless of you if you were to move too fast, and sloppy of you if you were to move too slowly. That is where the question comes in. It challenges you to consider your status and decide if any further action is necessary. Failure to make the right choice often ends in regret. An alternative question, mostly used at the beginning of a manipulation to better gauge the chances of success of the ploy, is to ask yourself how smart your target truly is. This might seem ordinary, but for you to succeed, you have to have complete faith in your own abilities while steering clear of overconfidence. And most times, a good perception of the target's own intellect is the perfect constraint. As effective as this rule could be, there is no trick or shortcut to knowing the answer to the question. To react or to obey could only be answered by you. You are to put every piece of information you possess on the target into play, and then consult your gut and instincts on whether one or the other is the right choice. You would probably stumble a few times during the learning process, but you could also be a natural, getting it right every single time. Whichever it is, remember to always learn from your experiences, because only through our experiences are we ever truly equipped to deal with the future. Practice makes perfect. As previously stated, manipulation has to be worked at constantly to attain the level at which success becomes the norm. Practice and constant use of the skills you learn would sharpen your skills as regards people and how they should be dealt with. All the advice in this book are merely words on a piece of paper or an audio recording without your own ability to bring them to life. Everyone is different, and as such, different methods work for them. This applies to you as much as it applies to your target. You have to be able to bring the ideas in this book in a way that suits your character and approach. And there is no better way to learn to do this than by practicing. Manipulation is a game that deals with emotions, and constant practice is perfect to boost your instincts as well as your confidence. Stick to these rules and warning, and it's only a matter of time before you become a master manipulator. Just like in every other field, without sharp instincts, you are ordinary. Without experience, you carry a large chance of failure. Without confidence, you can do nothing. Practice is important if you are to achieve all three and rise above being ordinary. Chapter 4: Understanding Basic Body Language. When two people meet each other, it doesn't matter whether they're old friends or new acquaintances. They could even be strangers, but they communicate through not only words but gestures. These gestures tend to betray our mental state and express how we are feeling. For instance, if we were feeling bad and irritable, we give off defensive signals. And when we are feeling happy, we tend to be more relaxed and friendlier. These gestures and signals relay our mood to the person or persons around us and affects what they think and how they relate with us at that moment in time. This ability to read basic and common gestures is rather inherent in everyone, but as a result of practice and experience, some people are more adept at it than others. For example, women are generally more perceptive to gestures than men, probably due to the fact that they might have had lots of practice dealing with their kids or those of others. Many common gestures, such as crying, laughing, and frowning, denote the same emotional and mental state in most people, with very little exceptions. However, your emphasis on body language and gestures as a manipulator should go beyond the study of the more common gestures if you hope to become a master. It should at least encompass the knowledge of basic body language for you to truly appreciate its effect on your everyday choices and decisions. You should also be able to notice and translate a wide range of uncommon expressions. Gestures and signals could mean many things in different places, so it would be wise to observe the general trends around wherever you stay and ask questions when necessary before jumping to needless conclusions. Furthermore, the frequencies with which these gestures occur vary with a variety of factors. One of these is age. It has been proven that the older people get, the lesser the gestures they use in communicating their opinions. Another factor is wealth or social class. It has also been noted that people higher up in the social chain in a particular environment use fewer gestures than those below them. These are all generalizations, and exceptions to such are bound to occur. For example, people who are very excited tend to gesticulate more, and those who are bored take on a more reserved demeanor. Thus, a bored teenager could probably use less gestures and body movement in expressing him or herself than an excited septuagenarian. In such a case, the age generalization would have failed. Well, other than these generalizations, it is important to pay attention to the particular gestures of each person while also monitoring their verbal output. Look for contradictions that give the person away as regard whether they are lying or hiding something, and make your next steps based on these deductions. The most effective way of catching lying in a person is to watch out for gestures that betray their true intention. Such gestures or behaviors are usually out of place or out of sync with the message they're delivering or trying to deliver. Understanding from less than words. The ability to tell as much as possible about a person without engaging in conversations is one that would help you well, especially when it comes to securing and developing a new target. When I say developing a target, I mean the first few conversations and meetings you have in which you try to determine the attitude and emotional disposition of the person towards key issues so as to better mold the character you would assume around them. This understanding of a person could aid your quest in many ways. It could portray you as someone who is perceptive and sensitive to their needs, and this is a good way of establishing trust within the target. It could also be useful in predicting the actions of a person as to better react to them. This reaction could be in many forms, varying from a modified approach to a subject to a complete avoidance of another. It is, in summary, a good way to avoid falling afoul of a person before you have been able to achieve what you initially set out to achieve. Many signs could actually mean more than one thing and should not be taken as a complete truth, but rather as a possible truth. What this means is that all possible translations should be considered before you jump to any final conclusions. This is due to the fact that more than one factor could be in play, and probably the telling factor causing a particular reaction is not even from us, but from another person or situation entirely. Such consideration should apply to both positive and negative reactions, because we, as humans, tend to apply this to only the negatives, while imagining all positive reactions to be of our own making. I'm going to consider the reactions we should or could expect in a first meeting, because I assume that after the first meeting, your status or likely status should be established already. Let us begin with reactions to expect in a first meeting. 1. Acceptance and rejection. Being able to perceive whether someone is digging you or accepting your approach is quite important, as it tells you a lot about the success of your current approach on the person and whether or not you may need to change it. Though it is very difficult to know if your message is getting through, little gestures such as moving closer and interrupting every now and then to put in a point should bolster your confidence that your presence is at least not unwanted. In fact, if you really want to judge whether or not your company is pleasing to the person, it would be more apt to look for the signals of rejection rather than those of acceptance. You should look for signs such as how regularly the person offers an opinion during a conversation, how frequently and how sincerely the person smiles or laughs at your jokes, whether the person retreats whenever you move closer, and how long the person spends in a side conversation with another friend before returning to you, and whether or not they apologize. The regularity with which the person offers opinions show how much the person is concentrating on your words, and this in turn denotes if and how interesting your company is. If the person speaks only a little, it could mean that the person doesn't like you or is bored. Anyhow, if walking away is not an option, you could resort to asking a question and using the person's answer to change the topic. Watch for changes in their reactions to gauge their concentration. Someone who laughs frequently and sincerely at your jokes is definitely enjoying the conversation and is less likely to leave soon. However, someone who just stares at you after a joke or gives a weak smile is probably not impressed by you or your wit. But before jumping to conclusions, the blank stare could also be as a result of a lack of understanding on their part. If after a few minutes of a conversation, you attempt to lean in to emphasize a point, and the target, mostly females in this case, retreats, taking a step or two back, it could mean that she doesn't like you or still considers you a stranger. She is surprised, or she simply isn't feeling the conversation as much as you thought. It might even be due to mouth odor. The trick with dealing with this is to stay calm and pretend not to notice this. Continue with the conversation as naturally as possible, and after a few minutes, attempt to lean in again. If she retreats again, it is probably due to one of the first two possible reasons, or the mouth odor. During conversations with a person, it is quite common for side conversations with a passing friend to occur. The duration of this side conversation could, however, be of significance when it comes to determining how they view you. If the side conversation goes on for so long that you look and feel like you're standing all alone, and yet the person with whom you were conversing hasn't offered an apology, the meaning is quite bad. But if the person constantly cuts short the side conversation to apologize to you, and even takes the hard decision of cutting short and postponing such a conversation, it means your presence is at least appreciated and not unwanted. If the former was actually the case, it could be due to the fact that the target considers your presence to be boring and the side conversation to be a needed reprieve. If this is so, walk away and do not return unless the target approaches you. Save your dignity. 2. Happiness. Someone who immediately warms up to you in a first meeting or conversation and is happy to have your company would most likely participate in the conversation, not just butting in to express opinions, but also to tell stories and crack jokes. Such a person is also likely to laugh a lot and may even attempt to introduce you to a few more people if you are a stranger at whatever place you're meeting. It is also possible that the person is intoxicated and their overly positive reaction is due to whatever intoxicant they might have ingested. The best way to deal with this is to go on with the flow and probably try getting their contact information for a future meeting, but keeping whatever conclusions you may have had aside for when such a meeting comes. A distant possibility is that they are utilizing your company to achieve a goal of their own, say, making someone jealous. I classified this as a distant possibility because it rarely happens, but I still felt the need to mention it so as to stress the need for you to always consider all options and to always stay aware of everything going on around you and your target. 3. Distaste or dislike. This is different from rejection in that the person in this case would probably not even be polite enough to answer you properly. It is rather easy to spot and could include signs like a frown, lack of eye contact, and short or monosyllabic answers. If this happens to you, do not inquire as to what might be wrong or what you might have done wrong. Instead, say your goodbyes and walk away. If you're to approach such a person again, be sure to have a friend of theirs to introduce you first. This could make all the difference. The possible scenarios are endless, but these are the most popular reactions you could come up against. The reason for outlining these situations and how to deal with them is to enable you to use the knowledge of basic body language and how to properly react to them to better make a first conversation or meeting as fruitful as possible. If dealing with failure and rejection is not a strong point of yours, it might be better to watch from a distance how such a person relates with others and judge using these same skills how to approach such a person or if he or she is worth the stress. The little things are usually most important. We have touched on some of the more elaborate and obvious gestures, and the little ones are up next. These are called little because they are mostly imperceptible and are done very quickly. They are those things one is likely to miss or overlook, such as a quick lick of the lip, a glance at a wristwatch or clock, a glance at another person, or even running a hand through their hair. These things are likely to possess meanings that are particular to different people, and as such, the same meaning might not apply to different people. These types of reactions should not be studied and translated as individual events or reaction, but instead as a part of a larger one. To adequately guess the meaning to this sort of reactions, you need to consider other gestures that might have come immediately before it, what the target was saying at the moment of the reaction, and any possible contradictions between the two. The truth is, such reactions rarely occur only once. Most times they are conditioned reflexes in the person to help them deal with something they are otherwise uncomfortable with. It is equally as rare for anyone to recognize any of these reactions, not to talk of translating it without spending a tremendous amount of time with the person. For this reason, such reactions are psychological gold and should be cherished. These inherent reactions are what we call tells. Recognizing tells and signs could be an art or science. The ability to instantly recognize a tell or sign in a person when you see one could be an inborn or a developed attribute. One could simply spend a few weeks with people and be able to reveal 3 or 4 tells that point to how the target is really feeling, while others spend years and still struggle to recognize one. This is no reason to worry, because while the ability to notice and translate tells makes manipulation easier, the absence of such a skill doesn't make it impossible. Having said this, it should be noted that Recognizing such tells can be learned, so if you lack the natural knack for seeing them, you can still manipulate your target, but knowing how to recognize some would definitely be advantageous. Some tells could be the tendency for a person to run his or her hands through the hair, crossing of the fingers, rapid blinking, twitching of the eye, rapping the knuckles on a surface, and many others. These seem like actions that denote rather obvious emotions, but most tells are. The major issue with a tell is that these obvious actions do not actually follow an easily perceivable emotion and are usually done so quickly they could be mistaken for necessary. Thus, to notice them, one must be observant, and to translate them, you might have a good grasp of whatever situation them might have occurred under. Isolating the situation and breaking it down into a list of potential stimuli could help in narrowing down the possible meanings. Recognizing a target. One of the most important things for being a good manipulator is the ability to notice the right people, the ability to pick the right targets. Well, sorry, there are no right targets. The truth is that everyone can be manipulated by a master, but it takes a lot of practice to become a master. And as such, for beginners like you, picking the easy or more susceptible targets is the smarter move. Generally speaking, the easiest people to manipulate are usually those with low self esteem, low confidence, or other form of insecurities. These traits usually manifest in numerous forms, and it is these forms you have to be trained to notice. Naivete. This is a very popular draw for manipulation because the victim is almost never aware that he or she possesses such a trait, and this limits the possibility that they will eventually discover you. It could be noticed clearly in people who always strive to see the best in others. Such a person, even when confronted with the idea and even evidence of manipulation, is likely to still believe everything is a coincidence and should have another explanation. This is definitely one you should look out for. Emotional dependence. People who exhibit this trait are almost always in relationships, and such relationships are almost always ending. Why is this? Because their happiness depends on the happiness of others, and due to this, they could be considered needy. But their neediness is to your advantage. These sorts of people would do anything to keep you happy, even if it goes against their best interests. And the best thing is, they do it quite willingly. This would mean little effort from you and an almost servile target. The only caveat to this type of person is that they are mostly always the jealous types. Be careful. Low self confidence. If you have ever met someone with low self confidence, you'd agree with me that they are always seeking validations of their actions and decisions, and these tend to expose them to manipulation. As a manipulator, your power over this class of people lies in your approval and the way you use it. Withholding such an approval makes them eager to please, and giving them the approval makes them happy, relaxed, and ripe for the taking. Pseudo manipulators. Have you ever met people who like to feel like they are the smartest and most powerful in the room? If yes, this is their class. People like this usually feel like they can prey on others and are good manipulators, but in truth are nothing but failures. They are very hard to find. But if you ever meet such a person who acts out manipulative tendencies but possesses no real influence on people, you have your mark. The way to handle such people is to play the victim or subordinate and strive to avoid doing their wishes while making sure they do yours. This might involve a whole lot of acting and a few concessions at the beginning, but would definitely be worth the hassle at the end. These people are mostly narcissists and are easy to pick out using this very trait. Lack of assertiveness. These kinds of people do not have the ability to make up their mind, and this is a weakness to take advantage of. You should strive to play the role of bully or higher authority, someone who makes decisions for them, provided you play up your best decisions while hiding your worst. You're bound to stay in their lives and stay in control. Altruism. This is one of those traits that are present in people who show a high level of honesty, fairness, and empathy. Emphasis on the empathy. This is the emotion to go after, as it blinds the target to your true nature and makes him more likely to buy into your act. This makes he or she susceptible to your talents, but not foolish, so you'd still have to play your cards right to have the desired impact. There are many other traits to look out for, and with time and experience, you'd discover them. Looking closely, you would notice that at least one of these traits is present in everyone you know. This is the reason why everyone, even yourself, can be manipulated, and as such, while playing your game, never drop your guard and always be on the lookout in case your target is also playing a game on you. I should also add that while these traits make people more susceptible to manipulation, your abilities and skills are the factors that would truly determine if the manipulation would be successful or not. Warning signs. Everybody can be manipulated, but some people are less likely to fall than others. If you are a beginner and you are just learning the ropes, it is necessary for you to avoid individuals high up on the less likely list. To achieve this, you need to know the particular traits or character types to look out for. Such people are the stubborn. They are not impossible to break, but are better avoided because they might cost too much effort. Stubborn people are usually hard to manipulate because they have self created opinions whose tenets they uphold strictly. Worse is the fact that they are prone to arguing a lot, and seeing as this is rather inherent in them, it is a trait you would have to figure a way around if you plan on sticking around. Except you are very confident you can get the job done. Steer clear. Insensitive people. This type lacks the ability to feel much in terms of empathy or sympathy, and only cares about their own interests. You might think that's a good thing, but remember, their well being is most likely top of their worries, and any sign of manipulation is sure to set off alarm bells. Immature people. Immaturity is normally a trait that should set people out for manipulation because it is a close sibling of naivety. However, most immature people possess the ability to hold grudges for a tremendous period of time, and you do not want them hunting you down for hurting their feelings or stealing their properties. They tend to make very determined enemies. The stubborn also possess this tendency. People with close friends and relatives. The best targets are usually those who reside far away from most family and friends because this reduces the chance of trusted outside forces trying to undo your work. Unless you can think of a way to wean your target off such influence, or at least factor them into your plans, the ploy is going to be extremely difficult to pull off. Even if you are ready to manipulate the entire group, ask yourself, is it worth the effort? Chapter 5. Persuasion. The psychological theories never fail to consider the target. Persuasion is a deliberate effort to change or alter a person's opinions, beliefs, or attitude towards a particular issue, situation, object, or person. This is usually achieved by transmission of a message, which could be verbal or symbolic. While persuasion could be used in a manipulative sense, it is in actual sense different from manipulation. This is because when persuading a person, he or she is usually aware of your efforts at changing their point of view and willingly or reluctantly allows you to try. In this instance, the person listens and concentrates on what you're saying and then tries to rationalize your ideas with reality before then putting whatever conclusions they come to comparison with what they previously believed. Your role in the entire dynamic is to state your reasons for the change you're prescribing, give illustrations and evidence supporting your views, and try to convince the target of your advances that your line of action or advice is their best bet. The main goal of this is getting them to switch to a state of reasoning or a product that you prefer. It is in this that persuasion resembles manipulation, because your goal is still to push the target towards an outcome that they might ordinarily not have considered right. The success attained in persuasion usually depends on the preconceptions held by the target and their strength, their perception of the person sharing the new message or idea, their perception of the message or idea, and finally, their perception of the conclusion on offer. Upon outlining these reasons, it should be clear to you that the subject of your effort would probably possess ideas that are at least dissimilar, if not contradictory to yours. And as such, the entire process would either hinge on your persuasion being very convincing or the ability of the target to meet a compromise between the conflicting ideas that would majorly mirror the changes you want. Below are 6 major theories that strive to explain the way the human mind absorbs and reacts to information. Knowledge of these would greatly increase the odds of persuasion if you could pinpoint it in your target. The attribution theory. This concludes that people would either attribute actions and characters to people and object respectively, either in relation to the context they are being considered in or according to their own emotional disposition. When they attribute using context as a guide, they are likely to come to decisions that take into consideration environment of origin and situational factors, such as seen when a person refrains from calling a product inferior or calling a person insensitive, instead arguing that the product has been made from the best possible items available to the manufacturer, and that the person is simply reacting as he has learned to from his childhood environment. However, when considering their own emotional disposition, they tend to believe that whatever is convenient for them is the only right decision or approach for every other person. Consider this situation. You meet a person at an event or gathering and try starting a conversation with them, but instead of giving you a polite audience, the person appears preoccupied with their own thoughts or acts aloof. Angered and annoyed, you walk away, and when asked for an opinion on the person, you characterize them as proud, arrogant, or self-important. In this case, the characterization you have concluded on is based solely on your emotional disposition and does not take into consideration the situation or possible problems the other person might have. The idea is not to determine whether or not you are wrong or right, but rather to analyze how you are likely to process information about people and things. You actually might be right about the person. Another situation is when you have been accused of doing something wrong, and you claim that your accusers have failed to see things from your own perspective and are only interested in their own point of view. This is a perfect example of considering things as regards context. In this case, probably because the things said are negative, you'd notice the emphasis placed on contextual understanding of actions. There is also a slight hint of the dispositional thinking occurring simultaneously. The conditioning theory, in this case, the person is likely to do things if they are tailored and conditioned to look like their own decisions instead of as a result of coercion. This is most utilized in the advertising industry, where commercials, advertisements, and billboards are used to convey information that would provoke positive feelings in the population of interest. They then connect such feelings to their products, thus making you feel that the product would bring such a feeling into your life. Because of this, you are more likely to purchase their product, thinking all the while that your decision was an independent one. This is usually possible because we generally perceive things based on our emotions and are more likely to buy things because they make us feel good. The cognitive dissonance theory. Based on this theory, it is assumed that people tend to aim for consistency in their thoughts, attitudes, and decisions. This is the reason why most people create principles which they strive to follow. Most people also seem intent on reconciling the contradictions as much as they can until they feel comfortable. I would give two examples on this. Example 1. You have a very strong and deep-rooted need for canned food, either due to the laziness of having to cook meals or the frustration at having to wait in queues for food. Then you're told that such canned meals could lead to cancer, and you definitely don't want to have cancer. But you also don't want to stop eating canned food. So instead of stopping with the habit, you comfort yourself that millions of people like you have the same habit and would never have cancer. The cancer theory might be untrue, but your eagerness to dispute the fact, or at least to make the consequences seem less severe, is your own way of changing your mind, or at least making the facts you have just learned seem less important or true. This is one of the ways of dealing with cognitive dissonance theory. Example 2. Imagine a criminal with a conscience. This is probably hard to imagine, but they do exist. In such a situation, his or her criminal tendencies are clashing with their tender hearts and causing a bit of discomfort. Such a person is very likely dealing with his or her problems by giving in to the rationale that a criminal and wealthy life far outweighs the benefits of having a clean conscience or good heart. Again, I am refraining from judging whether such a rationale is sound, but am more focused on the fact that the person seems to give in to a rationale that overlaps with the general aim of most people to deal with his discomfort. This is another way of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. The judgment theory. This one is very simple to grasp. It simply proposes that when faced with a new piece of information or idea, a person's reaction is more or less dependent on the way he or she currently feels on the topic. What this means is that we are likely to accept something that resonates with our current belief, reject something that doesn't fit in with our beliefs, or stay indifferent to something never previously considered. Therefore, when attempting to persuade a person, it is better to first determine their views on the topic to gauge whether or not you'd be successful, and if your effort would eventually be worth it. Inoculation theory. The inoculation theory supports the view that even if previously uninterested in two points of view, once argued for, you are likely to pick the dominant point of view and stick with it. Here is an example of what I mean. You have never watched a game of soccer in your life, but one day you are relaxing on the beach and happen to find yourself stuck between two die-hard soccer fans who support rival teams. An argument begins about whose team is better and more dominant, and they both turn to you, presenting their points like you are a seasoned fan, and after some time ask you to judge on who's better. You obviously would pick the person with the better argument, so as not to betray your own lack of knowledge on the subject. If in future another individual was to pose a question to you, inquiring as to which of those two teams is better, you'd probably find yourself arguing in favor of the choice you made then, maybe even with some of the same points that were used then. This is the power of inoculations. The most powerful initial idea always takes root first. Narrative persuasion theory. From experience, I think we would all accept that stories have a more enhanced effect on perception and opinions than abstract advice. The attitudes and opinions of people towards objects and others tend to change when they are told compelling stories of such subjects. The theory simply attempts to explain the heightened effect it can have on people if utilized properly. In this, the listener feels transported, and this greatly affects their perception of events, making them more pronounced and vivid than they might have been if they had been expressed ordinarily and abstractly. The psychological perspective. Ordinarily, persuading people would be difficult without the ability to properly organize and present an argument. But if inexperience in any or both of this is coupled with an inability to gauge and understand moods and stances, your task would be made many times more likely to fail. The ability to instantly sense and recognize a person's stance on an issue is difficult, not to talk of performing the same trick on an audience. Because of this difficulty, most speakers who are attempting to introduce people to a new point of view always tend to ask questions that would enable them to gauge the stance of the audience before moving on with their presentation. Immediately after asking such questions, they usually watch out for visible reactions from members of the audience, maybe a smile to indicate a previous knowledge of the topic, sitting up to indicate interest, turning away or sighing to indicate disagreement or boredom, or even a person willing to answer. These simple markers give you an idea as to how your message may be received and would help you map out a strategy of approach. It is also an effective tool, as people tend to express themselves more sincerely when they do not feel particularly in the spotlight. So if you're unsure, do not refrain from asking a few surface questions to test the waters, or more aptly, to feel out the crowd. It should also be noted that many people might give a negative reaction to one-on-one persuasion and would start arguments to further their points. The moment you realize that your attempt to persuade a particular person has deteriorated into an argument, it is advisable for you to walk away. Very few arguments occurring outside law courts ever get settled. Engaging in one would be fruitless and time-consuming. That time is better spent elsewhere. I stated earlier that manipulation is similar to persuasion, in that both aim to change opinions, attitudes, and actions from what they might have been to whatever you prefer. And I had also stated that they differ from one another in that persuasion is a more direct form of securing the change you desire, while manipulation requires you to operate in secret, using emotional exploitation. Now, I would like to expatiate on the relationship between manipulation and persuasion, or rather, how persuasion can be adopted as a tool for manipulators. This is not rocket science and needs only a simple alteration in approach to persuasion. It would require you to couple the ability to make compelling, irrefutable arguments with your ability to recognize emotional markers. Once both are in sync, you are ready to move. But why this two? The answer to that is rather simple. If you recognize an emotion to be dominant in the target and feel the need to convince he or she to do something without outright manipulation, most likely due to the presence of friends and family, wouldn't it be better to play on such an emotion and use it as leverage or platform with which you propel your point of view rather than just riding in without a strategy. This is why persuasion makes manipulation look humane and might even reduce the noticeability of your ploy. It enables the manipulator, you, to touch on the emotions of a target for a reaction. But instead of making your telling moves under a shroud all the time, you adopt clever arguments and let them do the convincing for you. The trick, however, is to always get the emotion right. Chapter 6: Persuasion, the Practical. In the previous chapter, I touched upon persuasion as a whole, focusing on the definition, its differences and similarities with manipulation, as well as their relationship and how they could be adapted to work to your benefit as a manipulator. Other than that, the means by which the human mind absorbs and relates to new information and facts was also discussed. Now I wish to approach how the theories of information absorption